Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So this year is the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace, of course, and we have done a couple of monthly episodes about the Phantom Menace, and today it's still March, so we're going to do our Phantom Menace episode because we haven't done it yet, and we're going to be talking about a couple of the opening sequences because they are very different between the previous drafts of the story and what eventually appeared on screen. Now, information from this comes from a CD-ROM. Yeah, you remember those? That was released in 1999. It was the Episode 1 Insider's Guide, and it had one version of a rough draft of the Phantom Menace script. And what is particularly striking about this particular draft is that Obi-Wan Kenobi is the only Jedi that goes to Naboo, which at the time in the earlier draft is Utapau. That's the name it's given, but it is Naboo, and that's what eventually it gets called in the film. And the people that are Amidala's people are the people of Naboo. Interesting. But anyway, the real interesting thing is that it's Obi-Wan the entire way through the first two acts of the movie, and it isn't until everybody gets back to Coruscant that Qui-Gon shows up for the first time. The earlier draft of the script also says that the Trade Federation claims it's responding to a complaint from a liberation group on what eventually is Naboo, that they're not happy with Amidala's policies and they're asking for the Trade Federation to intervene. But Amidala knows exactly what this is all about. She knows that it's nonsense, and she says that it's a pretext for invasion, so she's totally onto the Trade Federation's game. And of course she's right, the Trade Federation is already setting up to invade, which Obi-Wan finds out as a result of him being sent to try to de-escalate the tensions and end the blockade. So he winds up on the surface and he ends up being the one rescuing Jar Jar, and Jar Jar takes him to Otoh Gunga, which is the hidden city for the Gungans. Now, different from what happens in the movie, Jar Jar is not going to get in trouble when he goes back to Otoh Gunga, and Boss Nass, who is Governor Nass in the original draft, is actually kind of, happy to help, basically. So he tries to get Obi-Wan in touch with Amidala and the people of Naboo, but when they try, they get a bunch of static, and there's a Gungan engineer named Zem who comes in and says that there's a communications breakdown. So Zem is the Sio Bibble of the early draft. Boss Nass, or Governor Nass, then says that, well, the quickest way to get to the capital city is by going through the planet core, but he says it's really dangerous and nobody's ever done it successfully in my lifetime, so, good luck, you'll need a skilled pilot to do it, and Jar Jar gets volunteered for the job. And the early draft of the Phantom Menace contains what could have been one of the funniest scenes, possibly unintentionally funny, I don't know, in Star Wars movies. So, the protective bubble, the force field that exists around the hidden city, so you can see outside and, you can kind of walk through it as Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon do in the original movie, along with Jar Jar, of course. Like, they're able to walk through and it kind of dries them off automatically. It's great. But apparently in the rough draft, as Obi-Wan and Governor Nass are talking, in that room, a bunch of fish are just randomly coming into the room because fish are able to penetrate that bubble, and they just pop into the room and land, and there's one Gungan's job to pick up the fish and throw them back through the membrane. So all through this meeting, some Gungan in the background is going yoink and throwing fish back through the membrane as they come in, which I think would have been absolutely hysterical and probably would have been a bit of a distraction. So yeah, ultimately, I guess it's good that it isn't in the final movie, but man, that would have been hysterical. Now, something that happens kind of off screen in the final movie appears in this rough draft. So we know that the Trade Federation was actively trying to find out what happened to the Jedi and that they got to the surface somehow, and so they were looking for them, and they ultimately found Otoh Gunga and found the hidden city and the Gungans and whatnot. But in the rough draft of the script, one of these little flying sensor probes actually makes it down into Otoh Gunga, and Obi-Wan sees it and slices it with his lightsaber. So he is aware early on that the Trade Federation has been looking for him. And as far as Obi-Wan and Jar Jar getting through the planet core to the capital city, well, a lot of that is more or less the same as what appears in the film, but what's a little bit different is that Obi-Wan is actively managing Jar Jar's panic state throughout the trip. So initially Jar Jar is like, there's no way, we're gonna die, it's impossible, and Obi-Wan has to Jedi mind trick him into thinking, okay, it's gonna be okay, it's possible, and then that eventually wears off in the middle of the trip, and so Obi-Wan is basically actively managing Jar Jar, keeping him calm through the use of the Force while Jar Jar is trying to steer them through the planet core. The various sea creatures attacking and being attacked happen. There's a situation where there's like a fork in the caves and they go down the wrong fork, and that's when the sub loses power and Obi-Wan has to figure out how to fix it. But eventually they do get to the capital city, and they get there before the invading Trade Federation army gets there, which is also a little bit different from the actual film. And that's what I wanted to cover with you on this episode, looking back at the Phantom Menace at 25 and just how things were different from the rough draft of the script, or a rough draft of the script, to what actually appeared on the film. I think I'm actually happy with pretty much everything the way it went in the final film, out of everything that we discussed, with the exception of that Gungan throwing the fish back out the membrane. Even that I think I'm fine with. Like, I just wish we could have seen that, but it's fun headcanon to think about, basically. So that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy this daily dose of Star Wars joy, I hope you'll consider sharing it with other Star Wars fans you know, rating and reviewing on your favorite app of choice, hitting subscribe and like and follow and join to help the algorithms know that this is out there for other Star Wars fans looking for this kind of thing. And if you want to help support the creation and production of it, you can do that with just the cost of a cup of coffee a month over at patreon.com/SW7X7. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.